All right. Yeah, wow, we got 300 and climbing. This is great. Welcome, welcome. Good to have you here. Let's see. We're gonna wait for everyone to just come in while we get set up. Make sure you enter. You can get $200 in coaching credit if you fill out this link. So we'll drop it in the chat as well. This is great. We had almost 5,000 people register for this kickoff event. So I know a lot of you are going to be watching this as a recording, but the recording won't go out till later on. So hopefully you can stay here if you're here live, and we'll send out the recordings if you fill out this form. Also, if you don't mind turning on your cameras, it's always nice to see many of your faces, and just kind of helps us get to know you a little bit. We'll definitely would love to hear in the chat if you could drop like where you're dialing in from and what your top school is. That would be awesome. We'll do it again in a little bit too, but it's nice to kind of get to know some of you. We'll get started in just a minute. Scotland, nice. And Harvard, okay. DC, Dallas, Tampa, New York.
Dallas, represent.
Nice. Oh man, we're trickling in. Ooh, this chat is going to be popping off. It's going to be great. Toronto, Bay Area, Seattle, LA, Brazil, another Brazil. Love it. I lived in Brazil for a couple years, so special place in my heart for that group. Chicago, Scottsdale. Wow. Uzbekistan. That's probably the furthest away so far. This is great. Well, thank you all for being here. We're really excited to have you. We're at over 400. That will continue. I think we cap out at 1,000. So we'll see then we'll start live streaming it. So this is great. Great to have such an awesome community. Make sure you fill out this coaching credit form. It's just free money if you win. So yeah, we have, you can use it with any of the 3 coaches we have joining this call. We have an awesome lineup, by the way. Oh, 4 a.m. in Uzbekistan. That's dedication. I love it. Yeah, so make sure you fill this out. We'll keep dropping this in the chat as well. Huge shout out to Amanda and the Leland team for pulling this off. Great. We'll get started. All right. Welcome to the first event in MBA Admissions Week 2025. We have a packed lineup both tonight and throughout the entire week. So tonight we're going to cover a little bit of everything. We're going to kind of fly at that 10% deep across a lot of different topics, help you kind of get started, get some resources, give you some kind of general tips. We have 3 of our most popular coaches here tonight that are going to be sharing a lot of their wisdom with us, but we also have some amazing additional sessions coming up. So right after this, like immediately after, we have an essay session. So if you want to stick around for that, we'll try to wrap up just a couple minutes early so we can jump to that. And then we have 4 sessions tomorrow on essays, recommendation letters. You can even have some office hours. We can just drop in and talk to former admissions committee members. We have a women in MBA panel. Wednesday, we have a tech to MBA panel. We have a diversity event, financing your MBA event. So how to think about loans and scholarships and other things. International applicant, and then non-traditional candidates, even a veterans event. And then some bonus events with the GMAT and kind of just like what's next, how to think about getting started in this process. So a lot of events. Super grateful to the entire Leland team for making this possible, and the Leland coaches for volunteering their time. That this is all free so that we can give you guys as much access and value as possible. So super excited to have you all here. The chat is going to be popping a little bit because we have so many people here. We like to maintain this community feel rather than do the kind of stale webinar style. So please ask questions in the chat. Try to ask questions that maybe apply to many people, not just your unique situation. We'll try to get to them if we can. But we are going to cover a lot of ground, and we may or may not have time for everything. Another really important thing is if you are interested in any of these events, you need to RSVP for each of them because you'll get a unique Zoom link. And so we'll drop in the chat. Amanda, if you could drop in the chat all of the the link to apply to register for all the events, that would be super helpful. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so browse the full calendar of MBA week sessions here. So make sure you kind of register for those. That'll be really important as you get registered for all the right ones. Great, thank you for doing that. All right. And then, yeah, we're going to be doing giveaways throughout the week, especially if you stay on the call live. So we'll announce the winner of the $200 in coaching credit at the end. We'll drop the link again to do that. So make sure you're on the call when we announce that. And then, yeah, sign up for Leland to make sure you get access to the event recordings for each week. So those are our logistics. We're actually going to jump in to talk about real valuable stuff here. We just eclipsed over 500 people on this call, which is amazing. So that's bigger than my Stanford class. So maybe this is the entire Stanford class all on this call. It'll be great. And super excited to have you all here. We'll do quick welcome and introductions and then spend most of the time on the application overview and the panel. And then we'll wrap up at the very end. So quick overview of our panelists tonight. We have Tim, Carla, and Geri. All three of them have been on Leland for several years at this point. And as you can imagine, when you get an event with 5,000 people that have registered, you're picky about who you invite to be on the panel. And we're really excited to have all three of them here. They come with a wealth of different backgrounds. Tim, former admissions fellow at Booth, has helped a bunch of different people. Carla, experience at Harvard and Booth. Geri, former admissions committee at HBS. I'm actually going to kick it over to each of them to introduce themselves. I just wanted to give you a little sneak preview. They're all three are amazing. And we'll drop their profiles in the chat if you're interested in working with them directly. So Tim, we'll kick it over to you for your intro, and then we'll kick it over to Carla and Geri.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Super excited to be with you tonight. So yeah, my name's Tim Fenton. Started my career at Goldman Sachs, and then I got my MBA at Booth, as John mentioned, and was an admissions fellow there. I absolutely love the MBA admissions process. Just finding that unique story and sort of aligning it to what the AdCom is looking for. I also have experience at BCG and lead some corporate strategy and M&A work now for a company called Lennox. So super excited to be here and to be talking about MBA admissions today.
Thanks, Tim. Carla.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. I'm Carla. I'm a graduate of both Booth. So Tim and I share that in common, as well as the Harvard Kennedy School Master in Public Policy. As you can probably guess, I work with a bunch of candidates who are interested in concurrent or joint MBAs and who might have a bit of some atypical backgrounds coming from the social sector and so on. In terms of my professional background, I got started in this work with Ivy Advisors, which is an elite MBA consulting firm, and joined Leland a few years ago, where I've been recognized, thankfully, as a top coach each year. And just find this process really, really fun. A big win from this last admission cycle is helping a couple get into 5 of their 6 top M7 programs together. So that was a fun one.
That's awesome. Geri, bring us home.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Geri. I live in the Boston area, and I worked for many, many years at Harvard Business School. Many of those years were in the admissions committee. I've been doing professional coaching for the last couple of years, which has been an absolute delight. It's kind of nice to take the information and the knowledge I have from sort of the AdCom side and now help clients who are looking to make the move into any of these top MBA programs that are out there. So yeah, I work across all the sort of top 15 MBA programs, mostly focused on some of the M7, and yeah, work with folks who have been working in the professional field for a couple of years, all the way to college seniors who are applying early as a deferred candidate. So work with many different clients across industries and sectors. And yeah, I absolutely love this job and helping people find the best possible school for them. So thank you all for coming. Glad to be here.
Love it. Thank you, guys. This is going to be a great lineup. We did this a little bit earlier. If you didn't already, drop where you're dialing in from and when are you applying. Also, just by way of introduction, I'm John. I'm the CEO of Leland. I went to Stanford. Let's see, it's been a few years now. went through the application process as a deferred candidate and got into Harvard and Stanford, and then started working on a little side project that eventually became Leland and launched it while I was at the GSB. And now Leland, we'll talk about this a little bit, but Leland is now the largest MBA admissions platform by kind of a significant margin. We help a significant number of all the top M7 programs and really top 25 programs. So we try to do that through really accessible things like free events like we're doing here. We also do one-on-one coaching, of course, with many of the world's best admissions consultants. We also do cohort-based courses and boot camps, and we have some on-demand content called Leland Plus that is basically a collection of all of our coaches that have contributed templates or videos or other resources to a library. So we're building this platform for you. It's been a blast to see Leland grow in the last few years, and really the last year especially. It's kind of established ourselves as the dominant player here, and we also do coaching across all sorts of different career paths and GMAT, GRE, test prep. So if you're taking the test or you're applying to jobs, you're applying to school, we try to be here to help you. Our goal is to have many of your faces on this slide in the future. We could fill this slide with dozens and dozens of people. Our goal is to help you find a coach that fits your budget, fits your background, fits your goals, and helps you break into one of these top schools. So it can be life-changing. It's changed my life, and very grateful for my Stanford experience. So that's a little bit about Leland. Happy to chat more about that later if you have questions. For now, we're going to jump into the good stuff, which is the application overview and then the expert panel. And thanks for dialing in from so many of these amazing places. We got China, Nigeria, Colombia, Ecuador, Arizona, Ghana, truly all over the world. We have customers in over 85 countries, I believe, at this point. So it's pretty fun to see the global reach. All right, let's jump in. So quick overview of the application process. This doesn't even cover everything, but you have the GMAT, GRE. You can take either one. You have kind of your high-level application strategy. You have your letters of rec, your extracurriculars, your awards and honors, your resume, all of the essays, which feels like it should be bigger than just that one line because there's a lot. And then you have, of course, interviews if you are selected to do so. When you look at that list, what stresses you guys out? What's the most daunting part of the application? Yeah, GMAT, GRE, essays, test and essays. Ooh, flying in with a lot of test and essay recommenders in there. I personally always worried about the recommendations because I like to control everything, and I couldn't control that. But you can control it more than you think. Extracurriculars. Okay, so it seems like the entire process, which we will cover a little bit of, and then we're going to do deep dives into each of those throughout the week. So make sure you, make sure you join those other sessions. Great, this is awesome. Well, let's jump into the expert panel. Geri, maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Carla and Tim for this one. What are MBA programs looking for, if you were to kind of summarize that? And in that, how are they supposed to? This was actually a comment in the chat. How are you supposed to condense what they're looking for into like 300 words?
Yes, it's a lot to ask. Those are great questions. I think this is kind of how I think about it is first, there are some things that are consistent across all, I think, top MBA programs, right? So that there are certain things I need to convey throughout my application. And then there are things that are specific to an individual school. So you need to kind of think about both those things, right? There are some of those things that you can use across the board, and some I need to make sure I understand the program to know that I'm hitting on the things that school cares about. So you want to make sure that you're sort of aware and outlining both those things. So for example, I think it's safe to say that, all schools certainly want to see, leadership, right? They want to see your intellect and kind of academic performance. They want to see drive in you. They want to see that you can collaborate and work on a team. They want to see professional development. I think those things are sort of consistent, right? But then, for example, let's say you're applying to Sloan. And so, we also know that Sloan really cares a lot about, independent thinkers. That's who they want to see. They like creative problem solvers. They want people who are truly innovative, right? So when I'm about ready to work with a client on sort of Sloan, or I know, okay, where are we hitting those things? Where I want to make sure those big pieces that I originally talked about, leadership, the academic performance, all of those things are coming through, but also we're hitting on the things that we know Sloan cares about. So in terms of kind of like how do we demonstrate those things? That's the big question. And I think about it as kind of like, you have to first think narrow in, right? Like I can't show all of those things. If I try and show everything, I'm essentially showing nothing. Because when the person's done reading your application, they're like, I'm not really sure. Like, what are this person's core strengths? Like, you really need to first identify what are the maybe 3, possibly 4 things out of those lists where I can really demonstrate I have this skill set. If I think about all those and then I outline under each of them, what really strong examples do I have that showcase those skills? Can I come up with solid ones? And then you have to highlight and identify your top ones. These are the ones I'm really going to focus on. And you're identifying those strongest attributes. And then you're going to use, you're going to take those 3 or 4, and then you're going to lay out your plan. You're going to kind of map them. Like, okay, if these are the 3 or 4 strengths that I need to hit on, right? I'm going to make sure I'm doing that here in these parts of the resume. I'm going to make sure that this essay is hitting on these 2. You're kind of mapping those strengths, the different components of the application, to make sure that you're hitting all of those things and you're being really thoughtful about it. So I'm also going to make sure that my recommender is highlighting those things in their recommendations. And that's kind of what John was alluding to before. You can't write it yourself, but you can somewhat try and, prepare your recommender really well so that they are highlighting the right things. And so that's kind of how I think about it is, understanding the school and what they want, understanding those big picture sort of, strengths that, work across the board, picking your top couple, and then mapping your strengths like across the pieces of the application.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was muted. Amazing. Thank you, Geri. That's super helpful. Carla, anything you would add?
Yeah, I think Geri summarized it really well, just across, academic achievements, leadership, and then extracurriculars or what makes you unique or differentiated. I think the fourth pillar that I often think about, just in my head is like, will you attend? And Geri can speak to this far more extensively than I can, but at the end of the day, admissions committees are very preoccupied with their yield numbers, right? And so they need to have a really convincing argument in front of them that you are ultimately interested in that specific school. And that goes back to the tailoring component. So I can't underestimate how important that is, even if you have really great stats on paper and a really compelling story. If you don't make the argument for a specific program, you might get passed up. So I would definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Tim, anything else?
Yeah, no, so I guess a couple thoughts. One, I would double down on Carla's point. Like, I think one of the challenges there is, most schools won't explicitly ask you, if it's your first choice, right? Because everybody will say yes, but it is 100% super priority for them. I think the one other thing I would call out is just like sort of your career narrative. They want to see that you're being super intentional about the building blocks that you're building, why you want to get an MBA, what you're doing now, how that sort of folds into what you want to do short term, and see that you're building to something ultimately long term, where they can get comfortable that you'll be successful. It makes sense. They're willing to kind of take that risk, where they can kind of try to turbocharge your career. So I think being really strategic in how you present that career narrative is super important as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you all. Super helpful. I think that it's interesting if you were to kind of boil it down to, each school has their flavor of what they want, but to some of the points that have been made, they all want leaders who are going to change the world in some way, because leadership is just a scarce resource. And so the more you can demonstrate that you are a leader that's going to impact the world in your unique corner of it, the better. And obviously that's going to look different for everyone. Let's talk about timeline. I know this is a good time to talk about this because we do have time before round 1 and round 2 this year, and there's probably other people that are applying in future years. Maybe we'll start with you, Tim, since you brought up the rear this time. How do you think about timeline? When is the best time to get going on this? And how do people kind of balance the moving parts?
Yeah. So this is super important. I would say this is like the perfect time to be starting for round 1, honestly. You want to start as early as possible. but especially like a few months in advance. And the main reason here is, you can start building a holistic strategy, and then that will inform each piece. And just to give you a sense, like just to talk through recommenders, right? I will tell you, like, recommenders is can be a source of stress for applicants where they're, not submitting the recommendation in time, and it's starting to stress you out. And so you want to almost back into, like, give them a deadline and have a week past that where you can wait to follow up, and then, kind of bake in all that time for them to finally submit it. And so, to have a sit down and have a conversation with recommenders about what you want them to share, like, you need to be thinking about your strategy even way before that. So I would say 4 to 6 months before is ideal.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's jump in and talk about the application. We'll start with application strategy, which I know is kind of this vague term. Like, what does that even mean? Carla, Geri, either of you have thoughts on, like, how do people think about just like the general strategy as they pursue number of schools? How do they package themselves up? You talked about this a little bit. I forget if it was Geri or Carla, that these schools aren't necessarily looking for perfect in every way, but they are looking for kind of like the areas that you do spike. I think, Geri, maybe you mentioned that. But how do you think about application strategy?
Yeah, I'll chime in briefly here. So I'm going to give a very unsatisfactory answer and say it depends, the typical consultant investment banker answer. Sorry. I'm a former consultant and investment banker. But it honestly really depends on your objectives. So for example, I have some people who come to me, like Tim said, 4 to 6 months out. They've taken their GMAT, they've taken their GRE, and they want to work on, 4 to 6 schools comprehensively. That gives us tons of time to kind of, figure out, okay, when are the deadlines? What are your upcoming professional commitments coming up? How much time can you dedicate? And we put together a very, very tailored timeline based on that. I have other people who come to me like 2 weeks in advance, would not recommend that. 2 weeks ahead of an application deadline, and we really have to work overtime. I would not recommend that, but obviously that application strategy is going to be very different. I think the main thing I want to call out in terms of application strategy is I feel like when candidates start looking at schools, they all look very undifferentiated. Like they all look the same. They all have the same international travel components. They all have the same kind of core curriculums. And I would just encourage you, and this is why a coach is so helpful, that as you figure out your application strategy, you make it super, super tailored. In that, and I'll give you a quick anecdote, for example. A lot of people, for example, don't know how operations heavy MIT Sloan's offerings are, right? That's not something that you would know from a first pass or a first skim. And so my recommendation for putting together an application strategy is to really try to understand the nuance, and a coach can really help you do that.
Yeah, that's great. Geri, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I would just add that there, are a couple pieces that sort of, take longer or might require a longer period of time. So I think starting earlier when we were talking about timeline, just like Tim was saying, if you're able to do that sort of 4 to 6 months out, that's great, because you can really think about, okay, maybe haven't taken a test in a while, and I have to figure out first, am I even taking the GRE or the GMAT? So it gives you time to figure that out. Then you ideally have time for something like that to take it once, and then leave yourself time to take it again if you need to, or maybe even a third time. So when it comes to strategy, I think laying out that timeline, like Carla said, and then making sure you're doing the things that potentially could take longer periods of time, like the test taking piece, that you have less control over. You can only take it, so often after a number of days have gone by, et cetera. You might realize, hey, the test isn't, my score isn't as good as I needed, so I now want to get a tutor. Again, putting that at the early stage of that strategy allows you time to like get to where you want to be before, application deadline hits. I've definitely worked with clients who are kind of like, yeah, I'll do that. And then they do it towards the end, and then the score is not as good as they wanted it to be. And unfortunately now they don't really have time to sort of, deal with it. So I think planning that out in advance, like Carla said, a coach can definitely help you do that. Like, let's lay out all the pieces that are coming. Let's put deadlines next to all of them. And that way you have time for everything and you're not trying to squeeze it all at the end.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. Get started early. You don't want to be squeezing it at the end. We see this. I mean, we've been doing this long enough. The number of people that come to us 2 weeks with 2 weeks remaining and just say, hey, can you, transform my essay? And it's like, we'll do our best. We will help you. And we do have coaches that are available to help with that. But it is so much better if you have the time needed to actually like stay on top of things and actually let your story like settle with you and I remember my story. The first draft of my essay was so terrible. My mom loved it. Everyone else hated it. But it was like at 1 a.m. after like 3 weeks of working on it that I sort of like cracked what the narrative should be. And you want to give yourself time for that. All right, let's start jumping into some of the tactics. There are a lot of questions in the chat. We may not be able to get to all of these, but you can reach out to these coaches and set up intro calls if you'd like to work with them in a coaching capacity. And so they're happy to help. We also have a Slack community that we can share the link to as well. But let's talk about resumes because I feel like sometimes people just gloss over the resume and say, oh, I have a resume from my job. It's probably good enough, right? And of course, there's like lots of differences in what an MBA resume and a job resume might have. Maybe we'll go to you, Geri. How do you think about kind of the differences here of job resume versus an MBA resume and what you look for?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I 100% agree. There is a big difference here. I think the MBA resume really you want it to focus on skills, right? So similar to what we were just talking about earlier in terms of what do the schools look for, what do they want in candidates? The resume is a chance to really hit home in each of your bullets, like what is the skill that I am showcasing, here in this bullet under this, role. And so oftentimes a resume will be sort of a list of job responsibilities, and that could make sense if you're applying for a job. But in this way, you're really trying to say more about yourself personally, right? So you want to quickly in your resume get to, here are the skills that I used and the results and the impact that I made. Because as we know, they also want people who are going to do big things, who are going to make an impact. So you want to make sure those results are shown too. So, when you're thinking about your resume and you're looking at the bullets, you're saying each one, hey, what is this highlighting from that's showing that I can, this strength. So does it show analytical skills? Is it showing my ability to work collaboratively? Is it showing my ability to persuade? Is it showing my ability to communicate with senior leadership? Can I showcase I'm developing others? Creative problem solving, is that coming through? So you really want to showcase those in the, throughout the resume. And then just like a typical resume, you want to quantify impact whenever you can. Certainly not able to do that 100% of the time, but definitely as much as you can. I think another big difference is that here's a chance to show some personality, which you oftentimes don't do in a job resume. But this is, outside of your essay is another opportunity to do this. So I always ask people to add an interest section if they don't already have an interest section. This is like, it is a really fun and easy way to show you how you are unique. People can put some really cool things in there and they really catch the attention of AdCom. And I can't tell you how many times I would pull a question, like I would have a question for someone in an interview because they put something super interesting in their interest section. And so I'd be like, oh, tell me about that. I've never heard of that. And then it allows you to connect with the interviewer, et cetera. So I think being able to show personality in your resume is definitely a difference. And then I think the other difference I think about is having a leadership or an other activities section. This is not something you typically have in a job resume. You're really focused on here's my historical, job history, but like this is, leadership or other activities, you're pulling it out, right? This is showing your involvement outside of work. These are the orgs I'm a part of. This is where I volunteer my time. This is like the extracurricular stuff I do. And that is, as Carla said, like an important component of this process. So it's a chance to change up your resume to showcase that too. So those are some of the big buckets, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Carla, Tim, anything else you'd add on this one?
Yeah, maybe just a couple things. One is, you have to be really careful to remove any technical jargon. So that's one area where it may not seem technical to you because it's like, language you use every day. And that's where a coach or just getting an external party to kind of sanity check the language and make sure it would make sense to the admissions committee. And then the other maybe 2 points quick, I'll say. One is, Geri talked about this a little bit in showcasing the leadership, but these schools are really looking for like rising stars. And so I think the resume is a great great place to show some of that like professional progression, increase in scope of responsibility, of trust from the organization. And then I think the other thing I would call out is for a lot of schools, the resume is really the only document that the person interviewing you will have, for the majority of M7 schools. And so it's a great way, to Geri's point, in terms of like showing your personality. Like you want to almost kind of think about how do you give a snippet of like your profile on one document, to fit that use case as well. So
That's great. Anything else, Carla?
Really quickly, just teamwork. You're going to be working in a lot of teams in the MBA. So just showing that capacity to work collaboratively is usually really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's go to recommendations, and Carla, we'll go back to you for this one. How do recommendations kind of fit in to the application? Why are they important? Yeah, how do you kind of think about that when you work with applicants?
Yeah, and John, to what you mentioned earlier, recommendations are kind of the part of your application that you have the least control over.
Yeah.
I know I often get questions around like, can I write my own recommendations? And I would strongly discourage that. One, because you're not supposed to. And then two, honestly, when you do it yourself, it's so obvious through the writing and the content. I think what you can do though, and something that you can start preparing today, even if you're a few months out from applying or a few years out from applying, is really giving it a think of who might be well suited to write my recommendations and what might the potential highlights for my collaboration with that individual be. And so what you don't want to happen is you don't want to go to a prospective recommender and say, hey, I want to apply to these 6 MBA programs. And they're going to be like, great, where do I start? You don't want to give them a blank page. So oftentimes I work with candidates. I have kind of like a recommender packet, so to speak, that walks them through each step of the process. But I think the most important element there is kind of coming up with a menu or a catalog of stories for each recommender and saying, listen, like these are the 2 main projects we worked on together. These were the unique outcomes we had. These were my unique contributions, so that when they start writing your recommendation, they already have that information top of mind and you've made it easy and digestible for them to write about. So I just give it, a good think. And I think this is another area where a coach is super helpful. Sometimes I'll have people say, listen, I want someone to write, a direct manager to write from 5 years ago. And I often caution against that because that's a lot of time that's elapsed. So a coach can kind of help, put together that recommendation strategy for who's best suited to speak to your strengths.
Yeah, this is great. I'm actually going to I'll drop my recommender prep template in the chat as well, that you're welcome to use. This is like the example of something you'd get working with a coach or even on Leland Plus. I actually worked a lot with my coach on my recommender prep doc to polish it. I think it's so important, to Carla's point, that you kind of show them how much you care by making it easy for them, even though they're the ones that are going to go and execute and actually write. It also reduces the chances that they ask you to say, hey, write a draft for me, if you've already come to them with like a bunch of ideas that can help them get going. And so they can put it in their own words and hopefully do a better job than of course you would ever do. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Tim or Geri, do you have any other suggestions in kind of preparing recommenders or things that you kind of the role that the recommender should play in an application?
yeah, so maybe a couple thoughts here. I think it can be really helpful to sort of think about the intersection of like what you've worked on with them, what they would be excited to speak about anyway, and then kind of what the AdCom is looking for and how that fits into the rest of your application. There are a few things that recommenders are just really well positioned to speak to. And so I think if you think about your relationship through these, of these areas, you can kind of prompt them with like, hey, here's something you said in my performance review last year. Like, would love if you would say something like this again. like, leadership, like an external endorsement of your leadership will always be valuable, right? Comparative language, being able to say how you perform, like that kind of elevated view where they can see how you perform versus other people, like being able to say, hey, Carla's in the top 5% of analysts I've seen, right? Something like that is incredibly valuable. So just kind of thinking about that external perspective, and then feedback they've already given you, or things you think they would be really excited to talk about. I would consolidate all of that in a prep document, like Carla had mentioned.
Yeah, I would also just add that, if you feel comfortable, it also might be useful to help to help them write the best possible rec, is to tell them sort of why you're so excited about business school. Here's where I'm headed. Here's what I want to accomplish. Like, here are my career goals, because that way they can help reinforce that. You want to make sure that they're going to be a huge advocate for you. This is the person who's really going to bat for you. So they need to know as much about, sort of, here's why I need to do this. They need to understand the importance of what you're asking them to do, and that they buy into it. If you get the sense that, like, not sure this person is fully buying in, maybe they don't believe in an MBA, or maybe, there's just, they don't have time or whatever, then those are the kind of when you're getting those kinds of hints, you might want to back away and think about another person that is really going to do what you need them to do, kind of really hit it home for you, because that's super important. And I think the more information you can give them on, like, here's why it matters, here's what I want to do with it, here's where I'm headed, and they're like, yes, that makes a ton of sense, I want to do this for you, and help you get into the school of your dreams, then that's the person who you really want writing your rec.
Yeah, that's such a good point, that because these schools are sneaky. They try to say, hey, tell us how they really are. Like, I know they picked you as a recommender, but like, be honest with us. And so if your recommender isn't fully bought in on you, that appeals to them, and they'll say, yeah, I don't know how if they're that great, or I they kind of put it on their reputation. And so you really do want people that are your biggest champions, that are wanting to pound the table for you. And I think the way you prepare them and talk about things and say, this is really important to me, and almost make it seem like I have all the pieces, you're the last piece, like go deliver for me. They'll really show up, versus saying, hey, by the way, I'm applying to business school, can you like throw some, can you spend 20 hours writing recommendations for me and just pray that they are good? It's very different than showing up with a prepared document that helps them out and kind of communicates that interest. I think that's great. Thank you. Okay, quick intermission for anyone that missed this, that joined a little bit late. We have over 600 of you. If you want to enter to win the $200 Leland coaching credit giveaway, you can enter here, bit.ly/MBA week. We are going to raffle this off in like 10 minutes. So make sure you do that. And you can use that with any of the thousands of coaches on Leland, including the 3 on this call. And a lot of people just have like questions like, what do I even do with a coach? What does coaching look like? I never worked with an admissions consultant for undergrad. So when someone asked me who I was going to use for my coach, and I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, like most of your classmates will have used someone to kind of help them. I was like, wait, what? And so I think a lot of people wonder what you actually do. And it's some of the stuff we've talked about today: essay strategy, application strategy, essay writing, brainstorming, outlining, resume editing, some of the recommendation prep doc crafting, and figuring out, this is a really interesting thread, have them talk about this, interview prep, all sorts of different things. So you can use the credit if you win for any of that. It'll also probably give you a link to set up time to chat with our team. We'll also drop the links in the chat for Geri, Carla, and Tim as well. So make sure you reach out to them. I know it's looking like lots of you have already set up intro calls with them. So make sure you do that if you want to work with them. They will fill up. Our best coaches definitely do fill up with clients. So make sure you reach out early and get started early. Okay, let's jump into the essay portion, because I know essays are stressful for people. Carla, what are your best tips for folks as they think about kind of starting their essays and preparing for those?
Yeah, so usually when I work with candidates, especially on comprehensive offerings, what I do is I kind of have an intake form. Some people have told me it kind of feels like therapy a little bit in the beginning, but basically, what I'm trying to understand is what matters to you, what your values are, who has shaped you, why you have, these certain professional aspirations. And so I encourage people to take the time to kind of do that self exploration and introspection in the beginning, because that'll really help as you kind of solidify the themes that you want to hit on for each school. What you don't want to end up happening is you just start writing and then you look up halfway through and you're like, oh no, like this is probably, not the most relevant thing I could have written about. And so I think for essays, there's so many ways to approach them, but I think my biggest takeaway for people is always like everyone has a unique story to tell and you just need to figure out what yours is. And I always tell folks, it doesn't matter if you grew up on the Upper East Side and New York and you never went below 60th Street. Everyone has a story. And so it's just about figuring out how to uniquely position yourself. And in past rounds, I've gotten to work with really fun applicants. So for example, there was a really interesting scientist working on a COVID rollout in Australia who wanted to who wanted to transition to the business side of things. And so that person came in with a lot of doubts, saying, I have a really technical background. I have no idea if this will resonate, but absolutely did. And we were able to find a way to tell her story for why that transition through an MBA made sense. So all of that is to say, there's only one of you. Find those unique elements that make you uniquely you.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. That is, you are not everyone is so unique and you're used to yourself, if that sounds a little weird, but like everything feels kind of normal to you, but there's so much that's unique about each of you, and you in the process of kind of discovering that. And I think Carla's intake form and I know Geri and Tim kind of do similar exercises with their clients where they're trying to tease out what's important. And I thought it was really interesting how I would think something was unique, and my coach was like, no, this thing is like so much more interesting. And then, kind of helped me rethink how I thought about myself, and what was important, what to highlight. I love that. Let's, in the interest of time, we're going to keep it rolling. We're going to go really deep on essays throughout the week. So you'll get a lot of that content. Maybe we'll go to you, Geri. What are some common mistakes or pitfalls that folks kind of make or encounter during the application process, and any tips to avoid that?
Sure. So we sort of touched on this, but I think this is the biggest one, which is waiting till the last minute. So the fact that you all are here and thinking about this ahead of time shows that hopefully you are not those folks. So, that will not be your issue, but I think that is, a common pitfall. I think the other thing I see a lot is, this idea that like, hey, it's business school. And so I need to be super formal. I need to kind of be dry. I need to kind of, be very strict and get to the point. But I think you do have a lot of opportunities, to showcase personality, like we were saying earlier, whether that means in the resume or in the essays, or even like in the little short answer places. Just because it's B school doesn't mean you have to be blah. I think they want, and I think this has come up before, but they are looking for people, real humans, to be in the classroom, right? They're not just looking for stats. They're not just, because if it was just about stats, right, then the class might all look very similar. And great, you have a lot of smart people in a room, but what does that get you? They want people who have interesting perspectives, who have a real story, who, and in order to do that, in order to showcase that, you kind of need to be able to showcase your personality throughout the application process. So I think, feel confident to do that. And if you have somebody that is, helping, taking a look at some things on your application, they can help you kind of measure, is this the right amount? Is this too much? Is this too little, right? Like, it's good to have a second set of eyes on anything, because sometimes people say, can I talk about this? Can I say this? Or is this too much? Or, so I think having another set of eyes is always helpful. But I think, knowing that you don't have to be dry, they are looking for real people with personalities, people that their other classmates, people in the room and in the community are going to want to be around, and someone who cares about their school and is going to give back, right? And so, it's not just about what are the, the sort of accomplishments and the stats around you. I'd say that's kind of how I think about it.
I love it. Tim, anything else you would add that you see people make?
Yeah, so one thought I have is just thinking a bit too myopically or too like execution focused through the whole process. So like, okay, I need recommenders. I'm like thinking who can I ask, and asking them, sitting down like, okay, here's the essay prompt, like just writing it out. I think if you think about it from the admissions committee's perspective, they are looking at all of these different pieces and how they come together and really building like a 360 view of your profile and trying to understand who you are. And so you can almost think of each of these pieces of the application as like one tool in your toolbox to kind of tell that broader story and think about how they complement and support each other, all the different pieces. And taking that kind of higher level strategic view, which is impossible to do if you don't have time, if you start too late. So, again, like taking the time and then kind of understanding it from that high level view and then building everything into that will just make sure that you're building a cohesive narrative.
Yeah, that's great. Carla, we'll kick this one over to you. Get a lot of people that feel generic. We've talked about this a little bit, but how do you recommend people do kind of find what's unique about them or stand out when they're, at Goldman or they're at McKinsey or they're, or they feel like their application is just a little too, generic?
Yeah, I think that there's so many different ways to potentially address this. So, for example, let's say you're currently in an investment banking seat, and because of that, you feel like you are really overrepresented. But let's say, for example, you're a woman or you're part of the LGBTQ community. There's still an underrepresentation of those demographics within those fields. So that's potentially one way to address that. And then just given the political climate today and like geopolitical concerns, there's should be you know, could be decent movement within the pool. And so, for example, maybe you're an international applicant, and before you felt like that wouldn't necessarily differentiate you, so to speak, but you want to make a case for why you remain committed to pursuing an education here in the United States, for example, even given, the climate today. I think that's a unique narrative that shows resilience potentially. And so all that is to say is it just comes down to like finding that unique angle, finding what makes you interesting. It could just be based on interests or hobbies, but showing the self-awareness to kind of, take a decent look at like the opportunities you've been afforded, where you want to go, and being mindful of them. I think there's a lot of different ways to stand out.
Yeah. I heard something from one of our coaches that, the admissions committee has seen it all, generally speaking. Like they've seen the tragedy, they've seen the international move, they've seen a lot of these different things, but they've never seen how you think about it or how it affected you specifically. And I think that really stuck with me, and kind of your point reminded me of that, Carla, which is that there might be certain things that feel generic, but you still have kind of a unique approach or angle, or it's affected you in kind of a unique way and set you on this course. Even I think about my own story, like I was small growing up and I loved playing sports. And so I would always get put last in the lineup or on the bench or whatever. And I'd have to spend the whole season proving to my coach how I could still play, even though I was small. And it sounds like the dumbest little story, but it like taught me so many important lessons that shaped how I made decisions in my life. And, number one, I learned that I should focus on what I can control, not on what others think about me or, things that I can't control, like my height. And number two, I learned that I should never forget what it feels like to feel small. And I should look out for other people that might feel that way and lift them up. And I kind of talked about how those themes had shaped me in my life. And so I think a good reminder, and I loved your point, Carla, like I think there are lots of ways that you can still feel, unique and stand out, even though maybe your experiences are generic in the way you think about things, or other aspects. We're going to go around and kind of give final advice here. Tim, we'll go to you, and then Carla, and then Geri. What's your final tip for the audience as they think about applying to MBA programs? I know there's a lot.
So no, this has been really great. I think maybe even just kind of piggybacking off of the conversation we just had. I think getting outside perspective can make like a world of difference. Like
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for my MBA consultant because like I had never applied to business school when I was going through the process. And I think just getting a real perspective, like somebody who had experience, kind of understood what good looked like, and I could bounce kind of all the, kind of more strategic questions, but then also like the stupid tactical, like, is this a dumb way to say this type of question? And even thinking about how to stand out with your profile, like something that simple, you can get so much value with, somebody who's a bit removed and where you're just kind of throwing up stuff. Like I was small growing up and it seems insignificant to you, but it comes together in such a beautiful way. And so I would just whether it's coach or even calling your best friend up and kind of talking about your life as you're thinking through your strategy, just kind of getting that lens outside of yourself can make such an important difference.
That's great. Carla?
Yeah, I would say understandably, people always focus on outcomes, right? So I want to go to Wharton because it's my dream school, or I want to be in New York for school. And that is perfectly normal. But what I always tell people is like, you can't control outcomes, but you can control inputs. And so especially with the right coach, all you can control is that when you hit that submit button, everything is perfected. Everything is authentic to you. You have done everything that is in your power to put together the best slate of materials. That's all you can do, right? And I think that there's great satisfaction people get, even if they don't land all the schools that they want to get into, when they know that they have given it their best. And so I would focus on your inputs. I would focus on the things that are in your control that can make your application great.
I love that. Geri, bring us home.
Yeah. And I would say, like, to Carla's point, one of those things that you can do that you might not want to is the self-reflection piece. I know it feels much easier just to kind of jump in, can I just open the application and start writing and start filling stuff out? It's kind of a quick win, right? I got some pieces done, but really, I think it will definitely benefit you to kind of pause, do that self-reflection work, like those kind of intake forms that, most of the coaches do, something like that, where you're sort of being forced to really write out, what things matter to you, what you care about, where you're headed, what motivates you, your values, when you've messed up, those kinds of things. You really have to kind of put yourself through those paces, and that is going to reap benefits at the end. So do that pre-work. It might be a little painful. It is probably, like Carla said, a little bit like therapy, but it's worthwhile. It will make your application so much stronger. And so try not to skip over that, that tough step. I think it's definitely worth it.
That's great. These are awesome tips. We had a comment in the chat that said that this was more helpful than the last several months, 6 months of research. So thank you, panelists. Can you guys give some love to the panelists in the chat? This was super helpful, and it's just barely scratching the surface of how much stuff goes into this. And we're going to cover a lot of that in some of these future events. So last kind of action items, and thank you for everyone dropping the nice words. First is register for the upcoming events that we have. Second, reach out to one of these 3 coaches if you'd like to set up an intro call to work with them. They will fill up. And then third, if you're kind of lost, don't know where to start, you can set up a call with our team. We're happy to chat with you, help you get matched to the right coach, point you in the right direction, talk to you about the boot camp versus coaching and other things. So we will drop all 3 of those links in the chat. And we will also then do here are the links to their profiles as well. You can see have so many amazing reviews. We just dropped their links to their profiles in the chat. And the winner of our giveaway is Gustavo Cruz Juarez. So congrats, Gustavo. We will send you a note in the email. We'll send you an email to get you all squared away with your coaching credit. And again, reach out to these folks, join the writing standout application essays. So we're going to go deeper into essays right now. We hope you'll join us. And let's get you into a top school. We're here for you. Thank you, Geri, Carla, Tim. Always good to see your faces. Thanks for everything you do.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.